Hello and welcome to my opinion archive. In today's video we are going to explore the Ratchet and Clank universe and why I like that series of games. There is going to be spoilers in this video. One of the things I've always loved about the Ratchet and Clank series and will always remember it for is its use of humor in these very serious stories and scenarios. There's always this humor over the situation that makes it easier and funnier. A example is I believe it's Ratchet and Clank 3, where Dr. Nefarious makes this grand speech about destroying alien lives. We have his butler Lawrence making sign language in the background in a very humoristic way, which downtones it a bit but makes it really funny. It's things like this that have always impressed me about the writers of the Ratchet and Clank series, that they always manage to make it serious but also have a funny side to the story. Another thing I have always loved about the Ratchet and Clank series is that you get to visit all these different planets and places in the universe, and they all have this distinctive different look to it, so you can recognize them and know what the different planets are, and they all have this specific environment to them. Like Calabo 3, I probably pronounced that completely wrong, but it's the planet which houses the Gadgetron headquarters, and you can immediately identify this specific world in the game where it appears, which is Ratchet and Clank, well, the original Ratchet and Clank. Or we have places like the Great Clock in Ratchet and Clank: A Crack in Time, which is also really, really beautiful, and you will easily recognize it once you see it. And although not every single world is as memorable, most of them have this very different and distinctive look to them, which I've always liked when you play the game, that the worlds look different. You can tell them apart. And one thing that I have learned to appreciate in the Ratchet and Clank series as I got older and understood the nuances of the story is that Ratchet, his story in the original Ratchet and Clank and also in the reboot is about him meeting his great hero, Captain Quark, and discovering that he isn't actually this great hero he was led to believe. But we see how he faces this and becomes a hero himself, and how he deals with this discovery that his great idol wasn't such a perfect person after all. I also liked the later stories focusing about him being the last Lombax and how that affected him and his quest to find out what happened to his people and maybe get his family back. I also really like that Clank has his own story and how it turns out. It starts by him being rejected because he was built differently than the model of robot he was supposed to be. But it turns out that this wasn't actually a problem. He learned to deal with it, and he was actually also specifically built for a much greater purpose than just being another kind of combat droid. He was, of course, supposed to control the Great Clock and, well, be the guardian of time. And here comes another example of the humor in the games. They make this big thing about describing exactly where the Great Clock is positioned in the universe, and it's positioned exactly at the center of the universe. And this, of course, sounds really big, but then they very quickly add, give or take 50 feet, which is, I always found that sentence really funny, because it sounds like this big deal. Someone have figured out the exact center of the universe, but then they aren't really sure about it. I really, for some reason, this sentence just gets stuck in my head, and I found it really funny when I played the game. Then I, of course, can't talk about the Ratchet and Clank games without mentioning many of the great characters. I really like the relationship between Ratchet and Clank, that they have these very different personalities, and it really makes for these fun moments and conversation. Like Clank being the really smart and intelligent and nerdy one, and also in the original Ratchet and Clank, he's also very formal and speaks. He calls Ratchet Sir, whereas Ratchet he's the more grounded person. He has the street smarts. He knows his way around the galaxy, and he's also really, really adventurous and doesn't really plan many of the things happening in the games. But on the flip side of things, Clank is actually very naive, despite him being so clever, whereas Ratchet is very good at figuring people and situations out. He very quickly discovers that Captain Quark isn't about to help them, whereas Clank very naively just runs with it and thinks that Captain Quark is going to solve everything. And now to some of the very great side characters. We have the greatest hero of all time, Copernicus Leslie Quark. Yeah, that's his full name. I have always liked Captain Quark. He was a great and funny character throughout the entire series, with his really always funny and interesting plans, which always involved Ratchet doing almost everything, and his weird undercover disguise, like the time he disguised himself as a nurse. And then there was the time he got a pet, which was this very big monster, and he called it Snowball. I just always found Captain Quark really funny. And then we have, of course, another very great side character, which I have always liked throughout the entire series, and he's known as Big Al. I really liked him because he had this very geeky nature over him. He was very good at computers, and him and Clank always talked about different computer parts, and I really just found him very sort of, I don't know if I can say relatable, because I don't know anything about that, but like you could recognize him as someone you might know, someone you might meet in the real world. And then I have one last little side character, or in this case maybe side species you could call it, which I've really liked in the A Crack in Time is the only game I can remember they appeared in. That's the Sonys, the little alien people who took care of the Great Clock. I really found them very fascinating and interesting when I played that game. Of course, these examples are only some of the things I like in these games. The villains, for instance, in Ratchet and Clank, I found many of them quite memorable and really liked a lot of them. The most infamous one is Dr. Nefarious. I will almost certainly never forget all the times that he has started talking about something, and then his, I don't know what you call it, mechanics just froze, and he started playing these bits of radios or TV programs his system picked up. I really found that very, funny. Some of the other memorable villains in the games are Chairman Drake from the original and the reboot. Ratchet and Clank. I found him very, very scary when I played the first game, because I found his idea of destroying planets and putting them together to be really interesting, but also really scary, because he destroyed parts of different planets. And the funny thing about this is that this game is obviously in English, but at the time it wasn't translated. So although I was very young and didn't understand very much of what was being explained or told during the story, I could understand what was going on due to the pictures. So, although I didn't understand why he was destroying planets, I understood that he was destroying the planets, and that really made him a scary villain to me. Then we have a villain that I've just found really interesting, and that's Emperor Tachyon from, I believe it's Tools of Destruction. This guy I understood a lot better because that game was actually translated into my native language. And I found him very interesting because he was a lot like Ratchet. He have also lost his race. But this was by the hand of the Lombax, so he had a reason to dislike Ratchet. And I found it very interesting to figure out his background and why he was an evil villain. And then I have two villains that might only be memorable to me. I don't know if other people consider them as big, memorable villains, but I do consider them big villains, and that's Ace Hardlight and Glenman Vox, I think it's pronounced, from the game Ratchet & Clank Gladiators. I really find these two villains memorable to me because, well, Ace Hardlight, I remember him because of one thing and one specific scene in Ratchet & Clank Gladiators, and that is that he shoots Big L. And yes, that's almost one of the few things I remember him doing, but I will remember that man forever because he shot Big L, and I really liked Big L as a character. And Glenman Vox, I still don't think I'm saying that name correctly. He was the owner of the Gladiator Arena, and I remember him because, well, he was a part of this game and we followed him a lot. But I will specifically remember him from one scene, which I also didn't get the entirety of the scene because, again, it was in English and I didn't speak very well or understood English very well. But I understood, well, I believe I understood exactly what was going on because he was trying to bribe Ratchet into, well, going over to his side with like these big deals about like Ratchet action figures and all these different things. And I will basically remember him because that's how he was. He was an entertainer, and he tried to bribe Ratchet and had this entire Gladiator program. And I also remember him being a very, very difficult last boss. So I don't know if the majority of Ratchet & Clank fans consider these two as iconic villains, but I do. And then we have my second last point about why I really like the Ratchet & Clank games, and that is, of course, the very iconic weapons and very unique weapons in all of the games. Some of the ones I have come to mind is Mr. Zurgon, the little robot who just kills everything for you, and this weapon's name I had a little bit of a hard time finding because I think the name I used to refer to, if I translate that, I don't think it's correct, but it's the rhythm bomb, or what I've found to be called a Groovytron, I think. It's the weapon you use to get every enemy in the game to dance, and I always found that weapon really, really funny. Another really unique weapon, which I also liked and will probably never forget from the Ratchet & Clank series, is the Sheepinator, which turns enemies into sheep. I always found it really funny when I was younger. I probably still do. And this weapon also took me some time to find the name of. It's called a Rift Inducer, if I found the correct name. I'm not sure which game it's from, but I remember it very clearly. It's the weapon where you shoot a black hole, where there comes like some tentacle monsters out and just grabs enemies and eats them. I remember it because it had a really funny introduction, where they described it as being, liking reading and long walks on the beach, and that's another part of the fun the creators put into this game, that they describe the weapons not just as something really destructive, but something really funny. And my last point, which I already mentioned, but I'm just gonna repeat it, it's the accessibility of the games that I discovered when I was younger, of course, that, as I've stated a few times, I didn't understand everything that happened because I didn't understand all the English, but I still found the games really funny because it was very easy to get an idea of what was happening because of the visuals in the game, and even the funny jokes and stuff like that. I understood parts of it because you could see what was happening. You could understand that this was a very dangerous and serious situation, but you could also see all the little funny aspects happening around you, the things you wouldn't suspect to see. So I really like the games for having this accessible parts to it, that you don't necessarily have to understand everything, but you can still find them funny and you can still find them interesting. Of course, I have found them even better now that I understand the English in the games. And I found them more funnier and had a bigger appreciation for the stories. But I like the fact that you don't necessarily have to. These are games for younger people, so you don't necessarily have to understand everything, but you can still enjoy them. This has been, well, my opinion archive, and I really hope you liked this video. I hope you'll consider subscribing and leaving a like, and thank you for listening to this video.